Hello everyone, Professor Giles here, AR105, and we really just finished up with Rococo, a short little time period of just frivolousness. Now coming after that, um, and one thing here, remember that these different periods of art, no one actually stood up one day and said, hey, let's have the Enlightenment, or hey, let's create Rococo. It's a natural ebb and flow. It's some artwork that's really out there and prevalent, and then some of those students or proponents of it say, well, let's do something a little bit different. And even if they don't decide to do, quote, something radically different, they just go off on a tangent and they keep going, and maybe that becomes the great new art period. But it's really nothing that's designed. It is just a natural flow. So here with the Enlightenment, one of the things about the Enlightenment and what we'll see later with Neoclassicism, that it is a reaction to the excesses of the Rococo and a bit of the Baroque. So during this time, I'm not going to go into in depth on the scientific and philosophic truths that were being looked for in arts and in philosophy. But the artwork is sort of reacting to that. Okay, the book does a pretty good job of talking about the more scientific and the look into philosophy. But I just want to show you a few images that they touch on, but just give a couple more. Now, in the book, they give you this piece. Now, these are what are called the grand manner type of artwork. It's basically an English art form, although it did come over to America a little bit. It did come down into France and Germany, but really it's the English that really promote it and latch onto it. So some of the things that we see here are a solitary figure, normally, usually someone of standing, wealthy or not necessarily royal, military leaders, even just, I'll say everyday, but maybe not the lower military, enlisted men type, but more of the gentry that would have been officers, and especially their wives and their children. So here we have Sarah Campbell, who we don't know what she's done, we don't know who she is, but she's this elegant woman with the latest clothing and hairstyles. Wow. Here's a military man with his horse, probably a cavalry officer, the Grenadier Guards. Okay. And then the Lord over here, who's a general. Some of the things to look at: a low horizon, usually something behind them that's dark to give a contrast to what they're wearing. Except for Sarah here, where she has the sky that's a basic blue, but then the yellows and the lights and a little orange tinge is a contrast. Okay, so that's the grand manner. Now this is by Joshua Reynolds. All of these are. And he was a proponent of this style. Notice how everything is very warm. And then the background are cold, as in she has very warm yellows and light colored colors here. The brightness of the red, but then there's blue behind her, which is more of a cool color. So there's supposed to be this push-pull in color theory, that there are cool colors, blue, greens, that will push back and look like they're going off in the distance, and then colors that pull forward that we notice a lot more, like reds and yellows. So you have this push and pull, that the background is cool, it's far away, and the forefront is light and warm. But there's another artist, Gainsborough, who is really an opponent of Reynolds, and they really hated each other a lot. And he started doing almost like out of spite. What he started doing against Reynolds' style is creating warm backgrounds and cool foreground. So that's what is the genesis of the Blue Boy, where he creates this boy in this outfit that is a very cool blue. Yeah, there's light areas, dark areas, but blue is a light color, is a cool color. But then the background has a lot of red, yellows, purples that are warm colors. So really he's thumbing his nose at what Reynolds would do. And hopefully you can see the difference here in the tone. That even something like this that you see 100 of at almost any antique store, there really was something going on in their culture and their society. Okay, let's go on to Neoclassicism. Okay, Neoclassicism is somewhat complicated. We're going to look at some of the architecture, and in the architecture, and really overall, the Neoclassicism is the new classicism, neo for new, classicism, classicism. So they're looking back at the Romans and the Greeks, sort of like the Renaissance. What was going on during this time, that there were archaeological finds all over Italy and in Greece, especially in Pompeii, where artists and culture were able to see the real thing, not what they thought the Romans were doing, not what they thought the Greeks were doing, but actual pieces. They could unearth rooms and see what was in that room, what the walls were like, what their artwork was like, what their food is like, all kinds of things. So the Neoclassicism is getting back to the real classicism versus what they would do in the Baroque. So this is going to be another break with the Baroque and the Rococo. It's more accurate, like it says here. It becomes the unofficial style of Napoleon and the French Revolution before him. And really it spread around the world. So some of the main artists for this, there's Christopher Wren in England. He's one of the main proponents. And he is using the same language that the Romans and the Greeks would create their buildings with, at least their temples. Columns, especially the Corinthian, and the entablature here, especially the triangular pediment. And unlike St. Peter's in Rome, Wren knew enough to keep it interesting. It isn't just a big slab. There is no attic above to cut everything off to make it look just quiet and staid. Now, this isn't the greatest piece of architecture in the world, but it still is a great piece. If you're in London, go visit it. But for neoclassical, it does go around the world. And this slide is more to show the influences that you had the ancient Romans and their buildings. They influenced Palladio, who during the Renaissance is looking at the ancient Roman structures and trying to create what he thought was authentic Roman and put his own little twist on it. Here, a villa in Italy, it's a cube, but then on every side of the cube is the front of a temple, and that's the entrance to it, and it has a dome, sort of like the Pantheon. But then we come to America 200-300 years later. Here's Thomas Jefferson, and he creates his own home, Monticello, to look like or to be influenced by Palladio. So he makes it much smaller. It's made out of brick, but he has a pediment and the columns and a dome in the middle of his home upstairs. You can get to it. and there's another area like this on the other side. So he's Americanized it. He's made it smaller. And even though he was wealthy landowner, it's not like this where it's a palace. Okay. Now, really, when you go to Washington, D.C., you will be surrounded by neoclassicism and the state capitol buildings around the entire United States. Almost every single one of them, not all, but almost every single one of them is neoclassical in nature. And here we see the little corbels, look like little teeth, other details on the exterior design, capitals, of course, and again, Corinthian. Interesting, if you look at the Corinthian capitals up close and in detail, many of them may have corn, ears of corn, or even buffalo heads on them. The designers here put different nuances to Americanize it. Okay. Now, as we move on with neoclassical painting and sculpture, this might not be as quickly seen as the architecture, but imitating the classical Greek and Roman in their themes, and it's the stories that these modern artists were creating. They're dramatic, they're sad, it's energy, it's war, but they make it static and calm, which does a contrast, and it's a bit strange, but once you start being able to see that, it's like, oh, that is neoclassical. It fits right in with it. One of the artists, sculptors, is Canova. He's probably the best known sculptor of this age. And one of his pieces here is the Three Graces that look remarkably, like depictions of the Three Graces throughout history, all the way back to ancient Greek in the 2nd century BC. So very simple is this and this. Okay. Also, he's looking back at the symmetry and the body nature of not the Baroque with all its flash and energy and wind flowing the hair. It's quiet, it's static. So he's marking out the Baroque and he's going with the classical. Even the proportions of the body is more in the classical. Look at this pose and you look at that pose, and it's exactly the same on the lower half of the body, except for left and right. It's not the same. And then one of the pieces he did is Paulina Borghese. She is Napoleon's sister, but she marries into a very influential, rich family in Rome. And he creates her as the goddess of love. She's holding the apple, which is a whole nother story, but she's lounging here on a Roman bed. Now, everything that you see here is marble. This is not a real mattress. That is not real fabric here. It's all marble. But he is using that idea of neoclassicism to create something that looks old, but really it's new. And very quickly here, the paintings. Here's a painting that sort of kicked it all off for neoclassical paintings, Agrippina landing at Brundisium. It's emotional. She's bringing her husband's ashes back to Rome, but the painting makes it look very calm and static. So that kicks off this idea with other artists. And the leading proponent is Jacques-Louis David. And he's part of the revolution, the French Revolution. And he's doing things like this that are very quiet and staid. Socrates being ordered to commit suicide, but it's all very staid and calm. Here's tribes going to war, making oaths that they will either kill or be killed. And then what the effect is on the family. Can't go into the whole story right now. The death of Marat, one of the leading proponents of the French Revolution. And here he is, he's been assassinated, and David knows him, he's a friend, but he doesn't pose him as a tragic figure, but he poses him as a martyr for the cause. and the